Hebrews 12. Go ahead and turn there. My name's Stephen. If you don't know me, lead pastor here. We're in the middle of this series. It's called Discipline, and this is week 5. And over the last 4 weeks, we've been talking really about mostly the philosophical and the theological foundation for paideia, discipline in the scriptures, the impartation of information so as to produce life change. And when we understand discipline, we know that on the other side of discipline is a peaceful harvest of right living, which sounds good to me. These last 4 weeks, maybe not last week as it was a little more practical, but even last week and the first 3 weeks have been slightly heavy in nature because we're talking about something that the Bible describes as painful. I mean, it says it in there. This is painful while it is happening. And it can be, and it is painful. And you have felt that if you've been trying to add any discipline. I'm in day 4 of a diet. Last night was day 3 of it. And it's probably, this is not an over-exaggeration, probably the longest time I have gone in my life until, I started eating sugar without eating sugar. And so last night, I had so much, it was maybe the worst headache I've had. I'm trying not to over-exaggerate. It was painful. And I just kept saying to myself, Lupe, you're horrible, okay? And if you don't know that reference, a couple weeks ago, Lupe is the Greek word for pain, and it's what tries to stop you from making the progress that you're supposed to make or the progress that you're on to making. And Lupe is the pain that says, don't do it. Lupe is the headache. Lupe is 5 a.m. when you want to go out for the run. Lupe is the cold weather when you want to go out for a run. Lupe is swiping the credit card when you said you were going to live by a budget. Right? Lupe is the thing that stops you, the pain of not being able to follow through on what you want to do so that you can get to where you really want to be. Today I want to talk about this. The struggle can make you stronger, and you won't give up. In fact, we won't let you. Kelly Clarkson saying it better. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. The struggle makes you stronger, and you won't give up. In fact, we won't let you. I want to show you where that is in the scriptures. We're in chapter 12, verse 12. It starts off with the most beautiful word in all of Scripture, therefore, which makes us stop and ask the question, of course, why is the therefore? And so we look at the therefore, which jumps us back previously, and we know that this particular therefore in verse 12 jumps us back to Hebrews 12:1, which starts with therefore. The author, I think, is playing tricks on us. And so we go from verse 12, which says, therefore. We jump back to verse 1, which says, therefore. And so then we say, well, what's that, therefore? And it bumps us back to Hebrews chapter 11, which starts with the word now, which is basically the word therefore. So now we have to ask ourselves, what is that therefore? That's that therefore. That's that therefore. What is that one therefore? Well, Hebrews 11 is the culmination of Hebrews 1 through 10. So let me sum up for you Hebrews 1 through 10, because what the author is doing is building a case, and I think his case kind of culminated in verse 11, and so now he made it all the way up, but he's going to, in verse 12, do what he needs to do before he kind of starts bringing it back down a little bit. And so chapters 1 through 10, which precede chapter 11's now, are all about this idea. Jesus is greater. Jesus is better. Jesus is higher. He's the greater high priest. All of creation was building up to Jesus. Everything that you have and see, everything that exists in your faith, it's all because of Jesus. Hebrews 1 through 10 is some of the most beautiful passages of Scripture, of a theology and an understanding of Jesus. And so Hebrews 1 through 10 tells us how great Jesus is, how much better Jesus is. And then it gets into verse 11 and it says, well, what about those people who existed before Jesus? And it talks about how faith saved them, how faith was their assurance, how they had faith. Even before they knew Jesus, before he walked on the earth, their faith pushed them and motivated them. And it talks about these champions of the faith. You could take a quick glance at the chapter and see names like Abel and Moses and Abraham. Jacob and Gideon and Samson and David. I mean, these great champions of the faith. That's chapter 11. And then it jumps you into chapter 12. So follow the trajectory of the author. 1 through 10, Jesus is better. Chapter 11, operate by faith, just like these guys did back in their time. And we know that each and every one of these guys and women in Hebrews chapter 11, that they had great struggle. Great struggle. Noah had those who made fun of him. Abraham had to go through Haran. David had to wait for the kingdom to be actually given to him. I mean, each and every one of them had great struggle and showed great discipline in order to get through it, to get where God wanted them to be. Don't miss what the author is doing here. Jesus is greater. Have faith. And then he says, verse 1 of chapter 12, therefore, now because you've seen this, because you've seen the men and the women of old, you have a race to run. He starts it off. You have a race to run. So whether you're a 17-year-old high school student, a 57-year-old near retiree, a 75-year-old retiree, or a 30-year-old mom or dad, you have a race to run. You have a race to run. That's what this has all been about. There's a course for your life, and God has set the course, and you get to set the speed. And you won't give up. In fact, we won't let you. We won't let you. So this moves, and it's moving. So you got to race. Don't forget about the race that you're running. And then the author spends 10 verses after verse 1. He spends 10 verses talking about discipline, paideia. And the idea settles over. Man, this is going to be hard. This is not going to be easy. If you have a quest that God has called you to, getting there will not happen randomly. It won't happen instantly. It'll be down a path, and we've talked about this. The path is discipline, and it leads to peace. And along the way, pain or lupe wants to stop you from getting there. Wants to stop you from getting there. So with all of that in mind, the first word, therefore. Therefore. In other words, because Jesus is greater, because you have examples of champions of the faith, because you know that you have a course to run, because you know that it's going to be hard along the way. The author, I think, in some point, if the author was a great orator, if he was giving this, I think his voice would either rise in passion in this moment, or it would get soft to prove a point. He says, therefore, because what was supposed to destroy you did not. Because what was supposed to stop you hasn't. Therefore, lift your drooping hands. Lift your drooping hands. This verse, by the way, there's no other way to interpret it other than pure motivation. The only thing that the author is trying to do in this verse is to look at those who are going to face difficulty and to make sure that they keep going. To make sure that they don't stop on the journey. So he says, therefore, lift your drooping hands. Now, this phrase, drooping hands, it was a verb that meant basically like the hands were nerveless. They've become useless, like they had no functionality anymore. And you think about what the author's talking about here. He's saying in the midst of battle, in the midst of struggle, your hands have come down to your side. We see snapshots of this in the Old Testament when God was preparing an army for the Israelite people, and those who, in one particular case with Gideon, those who had their hands in an unready position, God said, all right, you don't get to go to battle because your hands weren't in the ready position. We see other stories like that in the Old Testament. And this verb, I'll explain later, is used a lot. And so your drooping hands are hands because of despair, because of hurt, because of pain, because it's just been so hard, have just fallen down. They've just fallen down. And when your hands have fallen down in the midst of battle, what does it mean? It means you can't defend yourself anymore. It means you can't attack anymore. When your hands have fallen down in the midst of the path, in the midst of the journey, when your hands are down by your side, it means they're not up ready to work anymore. When your hands have fallen down by your side, it means they're not ready to worship anymore. And the author is looking into him and he's saying, I know it's been hard. I know the quest to godliness has been hard. I know the attempt to break the addiction has been hard. I know the diet has been hard. The budget has been hard. Seeking reconciliation or restoration has been hard. I know overcoming the divorce or the death has been hard. I know it's been hard, the author's saying, but lift up your hands. Don't give up. He's saying, lift them back up and defend yourself again. I know you got knocked down. I know it hurts when you did, and you've been taking blow after blow and hit after hit. He's saying, put your hands up and start to defend yourself again. He's saying, I know that you retreated. You isolated yourself. You didn't think you could put yourself back out there. You didn't think there'd be another job that would ever produce the same income. You didn't think there'd be another person who would ever give you the same sense of joy. But go out on the offensive again. He's saying, get back to work. Get back to work. I know the depression has got you to a point where you don't even want to get out of bed, but just get yourself out and find some type of meaningful work to do. Maybe the income isn't the same as it was, but find something to start doing. Get back to work and see what God can do when you just take the first step to start working again. I think I've shared this story before. When we were in the process of launching the church here in the Holiday Inn and then eventually moving to the movie theater, I was in the basement of our old offices and our old junky speaker system was up, and it's the one that's out in the lobby now, and we were going to use that as the speaker system for our worship at the Holiday Inn, which was our first 10 weeks here as a church. And I remember a friend of mine was teaching me how to use the speaker system in the basement of these old offices, and tears actually began to fill my eyes. And he goes, oh, it's okay, man. Like, you'll learn how to use them. I'm like, dude, I'm not crying because I don't know how to use the speakers, okay? Like, that's not what's going on here. I said, the tears are filling my eyes because I didn't think I'd be in the basement again working a crappy $200 speaker system. I said, that's why the tears are in my eyes right now. It's because I don't see out there anything as good as where I've come from. But the only thing I know to do is to just start working again. And what the author is looking at you in the midst at the bottom, he's saying just lift them up and keep on going. Don't give up. Don't give up. Lift your drooping hands. And I know there's been moments, and I honestly pity the Christian who has never had the moment where tears were falling out of their eyes into their Bible and their hands lifted up and they said, I don't know what to do other than worship. I actually pity the Christian who hasn't had that moment because you've never known the depths of intimacy. And there are those moments when in great despair, you don't want to worship anymore. And he's saying, lift up your hands again in worship. In that lowest moments, just lift them up. Receive his rain. Let the flood come down and continue to worship. Don't give up. Therefore, lift your drooping hands. Back to the verb. It is, in one idea, lift your drooping hands. And this verse is used in the Gospel of Luke when it talks about the man who had the paralyzed hand. And when his hand was healed, it's the words here are connected. Lift your drooping hands meant heal that which is broken. And for you, it might mean that. See that God can heal that which is broken. But it's not the only time that this verb sequence is used. It's also used once in the Old Testament when it's talking about how a kingdom was broken down, and the idea of lifting the throne back up was lift your drooping hands. Or this same idea was rebuild the throne. In other words, what was built, remember, this is very personal. The author is speaking directly to the audience in whole and the audience in general. And he's saying, just like in the Old Testament, when God looked at the children of Israel and said, rebuild the kingdom, he's now looking at you and he's saying, get back to work, rebuild it. I know it fell. I know it shattered. I know it fell apart. Rebuild. Keep going. The same word is also used or could be used to create something new that doesn't even exist. Where it's not just saying, lift your drooping hands, like lift them up. It's saying, lift them up and create, work, create something new. Like that thing that you knew that God told you to do, and it's been so hard on the journey there. Get to work and start building it. Start making it. Start creating it. Don't give up. Therefore, lift your drooping hands. Get them ready to work, to worship, to defend, and to attack again. Therefore, lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees. Strengthen your weak knees. When I read this verse, I can't help but think of the movie Forrest Gump. When he's beginning to jog and he's got the knee braces on. And as he keeps going, what happens? The braces snap and he just keeps on running. His weak knees become strong. This verse, or this idea of strengthen your weak knees, it's a direct tie back to verses 1 and 2 when it says to run a course. How do you run a course? With strong knees, you run a course. And so he's saying, you have a course to run, and I know that from verse 1 to verse 12 here, you've gotten beat up along the way. Discipline has beaten you up along the way, and your knees, it feels like, have been taking blow after blow, hit after hit, and it's brought you down to your knees, and they're weak now, and you don't feel like you can keep running down the path. You don't feel like you can keep on going. And he looks at him and he says, strengthen, or another way of saying is give power back to your knees. Give power back to them. Allow them to do what they're supposed to do, to move at the speed that they're supposed to move. Allow them to overcome obstacles like they're supposed to overcome. Give the power back, the strength back. Why? So you can keep on running. So that you don't stop on the journey of what God has called you to do. Strengthen them. Give them their power back. Don't let it be stolen. Now, where does this strength come from? Where does this power come from? Where does the strength come from, or the power come from to lift your drooping hands? Where does the strength come from and the power come from to give your knees the strength back so you can keep on running? The author spent 10 chapters telling us Jesus is greater. Jesus is greater. He spent 10 chapters building a theology and a foundation for the people that he was going to bring to this conclusion so that, I don't know what the percentage of 10 out of 12 is, but whatever that is, all right, somewhere around 90%, that Jesus is greater. And so when you go into this quest, your thought is Jesus is greater. What do you see? You know what I see? When I hear these words, therefore lift your drooping hands. Lift your drooping hands. Lift those hands that have become powerless because of the beatdown. Lift them up. What I see when I hear that is I see Christ's hands. I see Christ's hands actually dropped. When Christ dropped his hands, he did not defend. He did not attack. Christ dropped his hands. He dropped his defense on the cross. And he did not attack so that you and I would have the power to attack. Christ gave up his strength on the cross where his knees and his entire body actually gave out. Christ gave up his strength so that we would have strength. This is the gospel, that Christ surrendered the power he had so that you and I could have it. So lift up your drooping hands. I see Christ's hands on the cross. The hammers or the nails going through. In fact, Christ would have felt all of the nerves, right? His hands going through, but eventually his body giving up and his arms falling to his side in defeat, or what would appear as defeat. But we know the end of the story. 3 days later, what? Lift yourself up. Christ is risen. Christ is victorious. And the power to strengthen your knees and to lift your drooping hands comes from Christ dropping his power and then rising out of all of that 3 days later. This verse is not a verse that tells you to find your inner strength, to find your inner warrior. This is a verse that says, look at the cross and see the strength that is already waiting there for you. And in the midst of your battle, in the midst of the course that Christ has you running on, don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up. I think we have this picture, I do sometimes, that we are on this course and we know the course that God has for us. And so we're kind of running down the course and we do take hits and we take shots and things don't go the way we want. And we're trying to save up money and then all of a sudden, the car blows up, right? Or we're trying to rebuild our hope and then something bad happens. When the body seems to be getting better or healthier or whatever, and we take a step back. I mean, we're moving along and then the hits start to come. And we think, okay, I just got to get myself back up and I have to keep on going. And I know there's going to be more Lupes out in the future and hopefully I'll be able to take them down. But eventually it just seems too much. What this verse is saying, it's painting a different picture. See, in Isaiah 35, which these verses, verse 12 is a direct quote of Isaiah 35, tells the story of the entire Israelite nation who had been through this process of freedom and then discipline. So they were enslaved because they rebelled and then they were free again. And it goes through this journey. And there's this moment when the Israelite people want to give up. And God, through the prophet of Isaiah, looks at them and says, tell them to lift their drooping hands and to strengthen their weak knees because their Redeemer will come. He will come. They will make it through. And the writer of Hebrews is looking back at that story of the Israelite people, and he's actually applying it to the New Testament believer. And this verse is not written in the singular. It's actually written in such a way that would say more like this. Therefore, you all lift your drooping hands and you all strengthen your weak knees. Another way you could look at it is, therefore, you all lift the drooping hands of each other and you all strengthen each other's weak knees. The struggle made you stronger and you won't give up. In fact, we won't let you. As the children of Israel were to rally around each other, the New Testament church is to rally around each other in the midst of the struggle and say, you won't give up. You're going to get there. And we're going to walk with you. There's a story in the Old Testament that's a beautiful foreshadow of this. Moses is leading a battle, and he's up on a hill, and his hands get droopy, and they fall down. And when they're falling, the Israelites lose. And eventually, he gets too tired to raise up his own hands. So his actual brother and sister, which they were his actual historical brother and sister, but they're really just a foreshadow of the New Testament church, of brothers and sisters in Christ then coming around and saying, we will lift your hands when you're too weak to do it. This is the church. Rallying around brothers and sisters in Christ in the middle of the struggle and saying, you won't give up. Lift them up. Keep on going. I know you've been beaten down. I know you've stayed down. I know you've isolated, but step back out and start to work again. And the picture that we're supposed to have of us running down the course is not me running down the course and I have to face this opposition and try to get by them like those old American gladiators, right? You know, you had to get through and get by so you could get to the end. Some of you know what I'm talking about. It's not the course or the picture that you're supposed to see here. The picture you're supposed to see here is you running down with the power of Christ in your knees and the power of Christ in your hands, and you're running, but you're not running alone. The entire army of Christ Church is running right there with you down the course. And when the opposition steps up, it's not you stepping up to fight it alone. It is the entire church of God fighting it with you. That's the picture that you're supposed to see. So don't give up. Don't give up. You will get to godliness. The dream will be rebuilt. Don't give up. Defend yourself again. Go on the offensive again. Get back to work. Raise your hands in worship and keep on going. Don't give up. Don't give up. We won't let you. We won't let you.